So today I am going to be talking about The Wisdom of Crowds by Joe Abercrombie. I did it, everybody. The entirety of the First Law series of books is done. All 10 books in the bag. However, I'm going to try not to talk about the series in its entirety in this review. At some point in the future, I'm going to do some kind of ranking video in which I talk about every single book and where they sort of rank. I will say this now, that every single book, even the weakest, the weakest book in the First Law series is still, I think I gave a 3.5 star. So the weakest book in this series is still very good. So that just gives you an indication of how good these books are, and I have had an absolutely amazing time reading them. So what's it about? Well, basically, it's absolute chaos in this novel. The Union is facing the Great Change, which is everything, absolutely everything as we know it, is being destroyed. There is a revolution, it is being knocked to the ground so it can be built up again. So all of the institutions like the banks and things like that Baez, the wizard, seems to have his fingers in and all that jazz, yet that is all getting torn down to start afresh. And of course, this novel continues the POV of the main characters we've been following through the previous 2 books in this trilogy. Savine Danglocter is trying to navigate all of the chaos and kind of become this sort of symbol of hope within the revolution. She is trying to use her position of influence to sort of navigate her son becoming the king. In this novel, we witness the downfall of King Orso, in which all of his privilege, all of his powers have been stripped away from him. And through that process, he is growing and becoming, I would say, a better man. Throughout all the chaos, Leo Danbrocht is navigating to sort of take control of the government, or the government as it currently exists, which is completely different. Everyone is trying to figure out ways to navigate and position themselves in this new world that has been born in the absolute chaos of it being stripped to the ground. A lot of people die. A lot of people die in this new regime. And Leo Danbrocht is trying his best to see if he can navigate some of the old ways into the new system and sort of take control of the government as we know it. And of course, Savine, his wife, they're battling against each other throughout the entirety of the novel. Next up we have Rikke, who of course I think has gone through one of the biggest transformations throughout the entirety of this trilogy. She is now firmly up in the north, and she is trying to consolidate her power in the north, because obviously there's different tribes throughout the north, and she is trying her best to sort of like bring the north together as one. As also, the Union is trying to get her involved, or talking to her about this sort of new regime that is being put into place. It's politics. These 3 books, the Age of Madness trilogy, very, very light on the fantasy. It's all politics. Everything about it is politics. It is scheming and backstabbing. There's still action in this. There's still a great battle in this. But really, these 3 books are just about the scheming and the politics and the backstabbing and the sort of the trying for power and our kind of journey with our main characters and their growth throughout it. That's what these 3 books are. And I think if that's the elements that you enjoy most in fantasy, then my God, this is going to be one of the best trilogies you've ever read. However, and I'll get onto this later, I like a bit more fantasy with my fantasy novels. So what did I like and what didn't I like? What I liked. Okay, so I'm just going to really quickly go through all the things that Joe Abercrombie does well, his superpowers, because they're the things that I have said are great about his novels from the very start, and that has not changed. So number 1, characters. His characters are absolutely fantastic. They are so layered, so complex. The journeys they go on, especially across this, Age of Madness trilogy, the journey that they go on, how they change as human beings, what they go through, what they witness, the friendships they make, the enemies they make, are incredible. If you are just in it for characters, if characters are your thing, then you have to read this trilogy. Amazing. Next up, of course, one of Joe Abercrombie's superpowers is his dialogue. His dialogue is so good. It is funny, it is harsh, it is shocking, it is dramatic, it is like beautifully within the world that he's created. All of the different tribes, the North, the South, the Union, where everybody is from, the language, the dialect that they use, the accent, everything is just comes off the page so beautifully. He is incredible at it. And the next thing I really, really love about Joe Abercrombie is it would be very easy for him to make this novel like 1,000 pages long and for it to be an absolute sort of like epic fantasy beast, but he doesn't. He keeps it moving. For me, sometimes that's for better or worse, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but he really does keep things moving and shifting. He gives you absolutely everything you need to know. It's not bloated. It's just, just pacing-wise, I think this Age of Madness trilogy, he has nailed it. But now let's talk about things that are kind of unique to this book alone. I think it is a really interesting and really engaging sort of plot progression for these characters and for this story being told. I thought the depictions of revolution throughout this novel were just brilliant. Like, just the upheaval and the rising of sort of like the character Judge and the sort of downfall of society as we know it, and the way it sort of influences and affects different aspects of the culture. I thought Joe Abercrombie did an amazing job with bringing all of those things sort of into the plot and into the world. And as it's the trilogy's final novel, and from what I can tell, I haven't done any research on this. We could have more novels coming, who knows? But from what I can tell, this is it. This is the final novel in the sort of like the first law world of books. And as far as conclusions go, I think he did a really, really good job. I was a little bit worried that, if you've read the first 3 books, you know how big a character Bayaz actually is, how powerful he is. And I did feel like at times Bayaz was getting a little bit lost in the background of these novels, but no. He does, I'm not going to say too much for spoilers, but he does eventually sort of thread Bayaz back into this story and into the sort of games that he's playing in the background. And it does a sort of full circle thing with Bayaz at the end and what he's setting up at the end of this novel. I'm kind of like, that's quite like that. Yeah, so all in all, I thought it was a really, really satisfying conclusion, not just to these characters, but also to the first original trilogy, where we started and where we end up. It feels complete, but also with a little bit of room for other stuff to happen. What didn't I like? So basically, it's a lot of things that I didn't like in the first 2 books. So I'm going to get this out of the way now, and then I can go into the more sort of idiosyncratic stuff. I just want more fantasy in my fantasy novels, and that's not to say that I want this to be a world of dragons and like magic and magic systems and all of that, because Joe Abercrombie's novels have never been about that. So for me to suggest that in the final books of the series would be ridiculous. What I am saying when I say I want a bit more fantasy is that in the second 2 books of the first trilogy, we're in Styria, we're in different places, we have different cultures, different characters from different cultures, we have different sort of there was a little bit more fantasy. It was still light in fantasy, but there was a little bit more fantasy in those books that gave me what I considered the perfect blend, the perfect sort of blend of all of them happening at the same time, which was just amazing. I loved those books. These 3 books, there's not enough. It is just the North and the Union. That's it. The North and the Union. There is no other, clans or cultures coming in. And if they do, they're just clans based within the North. Do you see what I mean? I wanted more of this world to come into play, and they just don't. So unfortunately for me, these sort of 3 novels in the final trilogy, everyone said they're the best thing since sliced bread. But I go to fantasy for a very specific reason. I love reading literary fiction for other things, and there are many novels that I could read like this that aren't in the fantasy section that do everything this is doing about politics and gameplay and backstabbing. Lots of historical fiction novels that I could check out, but I go to fantasy for something different. And this is classed as a fantasy novel. Well, of course it is. There's still a little bit of magic in it, but it's just, so it was too light for me. That's all I'm going to say. The fantasy element was too light in the final trilogy. But, there is a big but, that doesn't really affect how good these novels are. I don't want someone in the comments being like, oh, he thought they were shit because he didn't think there was enough fantasy. No, these books are excellent. They're as good as it gets. All I'm saying is that I go to fantasy for a thing, and it didn't quite scratch that itch. Next thing I didn't quite like, and I think this is just a product of what the novel was having to do, but I don't think there is as much humour in this one as others. I mean, it's a pretty dark novel. The entire world and Union is going through revolution. It's pretty brutal. There's a lot of people being offed and killed and hanged and dropped from a tower and all that sort of stuff. So, of course, the humour's going to be a bit light, but I don't know. I've just personally felt like there could have been a bit more of that Joe Abercrombie humour in this one. And the final thing I'm going to talk about, and actually this is neither a dislike nor a like, is that I feel like themes that we've been looking at throughout the entirety of the series of power, of control, of power structures, of the corruption and greed, and especially if you link it all back to Great Britain. I feel like we end in a place where I'm a bit like, I don't know, I don't think anything's been learnt here, but maybe that's the lesson. Maybe that's what we're being taught, especially with the way this one ends. I'm going, oh, it's all a bit bleak, isn't it? Or is it just destined to repeat itself forever and ever? And that's the first law world. It will forever be in this kind of flux. I don't know. And it's neither negative nor a positive, but I did kind of feel like I wanted Joe Abercrombie to make some sort of final statement. And maybe that is his final statement. But I feel like he's been making that statement throughout all of the 10 books, that this is a constant kind of cyclical thing. And I thought the final trilogy was going to break that. Which it did with this kind of revolution and the ripping down of everything, but then it just all gets put back up together again, and things have changed, but also, has it really? So yeah, and that's all massive spoilers, but I just don't care anymore. Overall, The Wisdom of Crowds is a compelling and thought-provoking book, and I think it is a really solid, really solid conclusion, not just to the Age of Madness trilogy, but to the entirety of the First Law series. And I will repeat myself one final time. Even though these novels are light in fantasy, if you are just looking for 3 books that are about politics and war and corruption and power and greed and the fight for power, no matter what category, whether you put it in fantasy or literary fiction or thriller or any sort of category you want to put the novels in, these 3 novels will stand head and shoulders above the rest. That's how good they are. But considering this is supposed to be a fantasy novel, I do have to take that into account when giving it a ranking. So I'm going to end up with 4 stars out of 5. I thought it was excellent. Utterly excellent. I'm just dropping it a little bit because, yeah, I just want a little bit more fantasy in there. So there you go, I am done, all 10 books. Woo, that took some time. I've had an absolute blast. I want to thank Overly Average Ben. Go check out his channel if you haven't seen it. He has been my sort of like my spiritual guide throughout the Joe Abercrombie series of books. I've been sort of sending him my thoughts and feelings on things as I've been going along, and of course he can't give away spoilers, and he never has. He's been amazing at just sort of like engaging in a discussion whilst also not giving away too much, even when I might be being a bit grumpy at different bits and pieces. He's been really good. So massive thanks to him. We have planned, who knows, I mean, I've just sort of moved house and things like that, but we have planned to have a little sort of video in which we rank all of the novels together. He does his ranking, I do mine. We'll probably do that at some point in the future, fingers crossed. Have you read The Wisdom of Crowds? And if so, what did you think about it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Please let me know in the comments below. I want to thank you so much for watching. I want to thank you so much for sort of following on this journey of doing all of the First Law series. I hope you're enjoying whatever you might be reading. Merry Christmas, happy holidays and all that jazz to everybody out there. And I'll see you very soon.